Hello and welcome to Surroundscapes, a podcast series hosted by Bluesound Professional, where we look at various aspects of the AV industry and things that are happening within it. This particular episode is one of our partner spotlights, and I'm delighted to welcome Evan Benway, the co-founder and CEO of Moodsonic, back onto the series. Evan was actually on an early series, I think series 2 of Surroundscapes, but a lot's happened since then. So welcome back, Evan.
Thanks, Graham. Good to be here.
So let's start by assuming people haven't listened to the series 2 episode, and maybe a good place to start is to ask you about your personal history, your career in our industry.
Sure. Yeah. Well, my personal history starts as a musician. I think like many people in this industry who gravitate towards sound, that was me from a young age. So both my parents are classical musicians. My father's a pianist. My mother's a cellist. I am a drummer, something I know we have in common. So always, listening to the world probably a little bit differently and from your average type. Then I might fast forward a little bit rather than give you the entire biography to when I was fresh out of business school. I'd really been focused on new product development, innovation, and in particular software methodologies of solving problems with technology. I was working at a large audio tech company then, Plantronics, who then became Poly and HP on the innovation side of the business, where I was focused on developing new technology, inventing and writing patents. And this is where I first came through my research there and also just through my personal experience there, face to face with some big problems related to noise. So personally, I was investigating problems related to noise from both an academic and industry perspective, while struggling to do that task due to the distracting reality of this beautiful open plan office. And so both personally and then with a professional perspective on it, I sunk myself into these problems related to noise, ultimately landing on what would become later defined as the soundscape concept, and then soundscaping, so the addition of sound to an environment to improve things. And that ultimately led me through some experience within Plantronics, launching products related to this, to then determine I needed to launch a company to solve this problem more directly. That's ultimately what Moodsonic then has become.
Yeah, so thanks for that kind of context. And I do remember the initiative at Plantronics. That was the first time I really had become aware of what you were doing. I got involved in the concept of soundscaping through meeting Julian Treasure at TED, I don't know, 15 years ago, over 15 years ago now. I got really interested in this concept of soundscaping in the built environment. But can you give us really an overview about what Moodsonic is?
Sure. So we take as our problem statement noise in the indoor environment. And I know with the audience that is likely listening to this, people will understand that noise, that one word is a big word. There are many definitions of what noise really is. But in particular, when you look at what people struggle with, when you look at the things that people complain about in the largest studies that have been done of the indoor world, so we're talking about offices, hospitals, schools, universities, amazingly, top of the list in all of the large studies is noise. Variously defined, it might be speech distraction, or it might be a lack of privacy, but people really struggle with the sonic environment indoors. And there are a number of reasons for this. Julian is, I think, pretty famous for pointing out some of the gaps in an architect's training. Sound typically is not featured in an architect's training, so they don't know how to design with their ears. And then I arrived at the conclusion that also just from a technology perspective, architects, designers, others were not well served. We're not really equipped with tools to then be able to do that, to design sound into buildings. So what Moodsonic is a technology that's meant to enable that, to enable you to design sound into a building or to retrofit a building where it wasn't thought about from the beginning, and to add sound to bring about a positive effect. That can be a number of things. What is probably best understood in the industry as an analog and what's been done historically is sound masking, the addition of specific kinds of noise, filtered pink noise is typically how it's described, to reduce speech intelligibility, cover up speech distractions, increase speech privacy. Soundscaping can be a little bit different in that you can do different things in different environments. So you might want to do that exactly, introduce some sound to mask distracting speech or increase speech privacy. With Moodsonic, we do that. We do it in some particular ways. But then imagine other elements, other zones within an office. Think of a reception where maybe the goal doesn't need to be speech masking, or an area that's maybe more about collaboration, or where the design intent is to create some energy in that space. So with Moodsonic and with soundscaping, what we do is we have a wider palette than with noise with which to paint. And so our particular technology is all about generative sound. So we're focused on technology to create sound in real time, sound that doesn't repeat, that doesn't loop, isn't the same thing every day or at the same time every day, and sound that's responsive, so that a user, for example, could say, change the soundscape in this way. Maybe in a mother's room, I'd like something that's take me to a particular place that relaxes me. We can do that with soundscaping, introducing natural sound, say from an island. We also make our technology responsive to sensor inputs. Most of what we've done to date is in particular sonic sensors. So picking up on, is it loud? Is it quiet? Is it particularly stimulating maybe to someone who's hypersensitive on the spectrum, or an engineer trying to do some focused work? And the soundscape can respond to those inputs. A major focus for us going forward now is other types of non-sonic inputs as well that should be informing our soundscape, other information about the built environment. So that's really our focus, generating sound that's designed to enable architects and designers to design with sound in mind, create meaningfully different types of sound for different spaces and different types of people, that's responsive enough to tune itself to the environment, and all of that to bring about some pretty major benefits as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned a couple of things that I'd kind of like to highlight. The sound masking element, which is what most people think of to start with. And I've had a number of experiences in sound masking kind of offices typically. And that can be, as far as I understand it, although we're psychoacoustically taking out that steady state sound of the frequency shaped pink noise, and we don't know we're doing it, we're continually processing, and that can be tiring for us and distracting for us. And I certainly know of a lot of spaces where they've ended up turning that off, again, because of complaints from employees and that sort of thing. But then, and actually doing some work with Julian early on, one of the things that got me really excited with it was this idea of using soundscapes to promote behavior that you just touched on there. Can you talk a little bit about how this plays into kind of activity-based work and the creation of neighborhoods and this sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. So, and I should say too, my own background in this really started then with exploring methods of achieving sound masking with sounds that were not as fatiguing as a noise source. So personally, I also found noise when we tried that to be fatiguing. there is anecdote out there, as you've said, and also generally speaking, there's a lot of research showing the extent to which even relatively low levels of noise are fatiguing to people, and also, given time, can have some real health impacts on people. Actually, quite recently, the WHO has ranked noise as the second biggest environmental pollutant globally. And so it's a big deal. We are exposed to a lot of noise already. And it's not what you really want indoors for people. And to give a counterexample, there's lots of research showing the extent to which sound can positively benefit us. So Julian has talked about this to great effect in his talks. Music can be profoundly positive for us, can evoke specific behaviors, can trigger memories, right? One of the challenges with music, of course, is how subjective it is, right? Extremely powerful, very subjective. So what's for one person relaxing, or gets one person in the zone, someone else, you've now triggered a bad memory. So music is very powerful, but too subjective for use in the built environment. Certain types of sounds of nature can be really profoundly beneficial for people. So bird song can improve children's creative output in school environments, can make people feel less lonely in environments that are otherwise eerily quiet. But then, of course, can also be very distracting and overstimulating in a certain context. So all those details really matter a lot. But what the soundscaping concept then does is seeks to apply that indoors in ways where it's sufficiently zoned, sufficiently controllable, and sophisticated enough to bring about the benefits of sounds that are good for people without creating sort of contention in diverse populations. Some of the specific things that we do are thinking about how sound can be used to make environments more immersive, restorative, and functional for people. So we went first to workplaces. This is what Moodsonic has done most of. We're doing more and more in healthcare, in education as well, so we can speak about that too. But going first into workspaces, our initial focus was, how do we create environments where people are more productive? Maybe a better way of saying that is where people don't feel overwhelm and stress as they're trying to focus, trying to do cognitively demanding things, while the sound field around them is interfering with that, right? So a piece of that is masking, covering up distracting speech, making it less distracting. But even that can be done in a more nuanced and sophisticated way than simply subjecting people to noise all day long, which is going to be fatiguing. So we'll do things like bring in elements that mask distracting speech when you need it. But if we have a quiet workspace and everyone's quietly focusing, or someone's early in the office and there's no one else there talking yet, well, you don't need 48 decibels of constant sound there. You can just have something much more relaxing and nice to bring people in. So these are some of the ways in which we take a slightly more nuanced approach to things like masking. A lot of the sounds of nature that we use as well have been shown to, in addition to that sound masking effect, to have a positive effect on attention. So attention is a very important area of focus for us. All of our attention faculties are under assault globally at the moment, right? From all kinds of technology tools and notifications and everything else. One of the amazing things about nature sounds, use that as a common theme here, is they can provide a healthy amount of distraction for you. So a brief moment that catches your attention, whether it's a wave gently crashing, or a beautiful bit of bird song, that when the mind momentarily wanders, it doesn't leave the same residue on your attention that a distracting conversation would. You can sort of readily get back to the task on hand. And research is actually showing that type of distraction then has a net improvement on your attentional capacity. So that type of healthy distraction from a nature sound improves your attentional capacity overall. which is why we see people doing better. And I say we, research has shown people will do better on cognitively demanding tasks with some nature soundscapes, even than in silence. So it's not simply the masking effect, but additionally, these types of sounds have a positive impact on our brains, on our ability to focus. There's a lot of nuance to that, of course, and what the sound of focus is for one person can be quite different to another person's sound of focus. But generally speaking, that's what the soundscaping approach seeks to achieve.
Interesting. One, and correct me if I'm wrong with anything I say, actually, because you know so much more about it than I do. But one of the things that became apparent to me early on when experiencing this is that you've talked about noise and the distraction of noise, and actually I've just had to mute my microphone because a garbage truck went past, so it was like a real world example of noise. But we're talking about noise and the fatiguing nature of noise, but then talking about putting noise into the environment. One of the things that I realized early on was that the typical levels that you're acting at are much lower than those of sound masking systems, because in this case, you're not trying to totally mask the noise with a soundscape, but use the soundscape to kind of blur the noise so that people still are aware that there are other people around, but that they're not distracting because they can't hear individual words. Is that right? Am I along the right lines, sir?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I might add a little bit of perspective to it, but sure. So, on average, that would be true. If you look at an environment in an office and you compared a more traditional filtered pink noise sound masking approach to what we would do with Moodsonic, where we're generating in an area, let's say, that's about focus, and where the end user has said, all right, I want some enhanced focus in this area. That's how they'd interact with Moodsonic. Then if we looked at the average sound pressure levels in those two environments, the Moodsonic one would be lower on average because we're not constantly at that same level. Now, there could be moments where we even come higher than let's say 45 or 46 or wherever the sound masking is then set. Because if the ambient level has come up due to a lot of people in the room, then it may be appropriate actually to bring the sound up a little bit, as long as you take it down when it quiets down a bit. But on average, yes, we'd be quieter. Also, it's really interesting. So back in the Plantronics days, we spent a lot of time researching, in particular, biophilic, so nature-based methods of achieving speech masking. We did some publishing in this domain. And one of the things that we found early on was that we could create a soundscape that had a frequency response curve very similar to a filtered pink noise, but that it had additional masking effect, measured both objectively and through subjective studies, that it was masking sound a little bit better. Two reasons for that. One, you can add a little bit more energy with that water-based sound in particular frequency bands where you'd want to mask speech. But then the other reason is that sound masking really focuses on covering up speech signals. So attacking particular frequency bands, we're looking at 1 to 3, 1 to 4K hertz, that kind of domain. But there's another aspect of masking too, which is a sound of water in motion, for example. There is more information being conveyed in that than a constant noise signal, which masks sound in another way, not simply reducing your ability to pick out particular frequencies, but by providing a bit more information to your ears are less able then to pick up on a distracting speech sound, increases privacy. So just one other point I might make is this distinction between noise and sound. So whereas with conventional sound masking, you're right, there's a noise problem, right? Which might often be that the space is actually too silent, and then someone speaking is a major event. That noise problem is solved by introducing noise. I would just clarify that our approach is fundamentally different in that we are focused on sounds that have a benefit for people. So whereas noise is typically defined as unwanted sound, that's a fundamental difference with the soundscaping approach as well, is that we're using sounds that are designed to have innately positive effects on people. So we're not adding noise, we are adding sound pressure, but for the benefit of people.
There's a couple of areas I want to kind of move into based on what you say. And I think the first one I'll move into is in this concept of being really integrated within smart buildings, and the idea of people bringing employees back into the workspace, and this concept, this phrase that I've used actually a lot, that a German consultant friend of mine talks about, which is that the workspace is the new hospitality, because employers are really actively trying to bring people back into the workspace. I think partly because people have come to understand that remote work is really good for productivity, because you're not constantly distracted by endless meetings and this sort of thing. But it's really not good for creativity, because you're not in constant contact, real world contact with other people, and having the sort of side conversations that spark ideas. So at least for part of the time, companies are really trying to encourage people to come back into the workspace. And one of the ways they're doing that is by making the workspace into something that is not easily achievable at home. And so can you talk a little bit about the way that what you're doing in the audio domain interacts with other areas, like lighting and temperature and even furniture, to create these areas of these neighborhoods?
Yeah, sure. A lot there. So yeah, that's a great topic. I mean, maybe the easiest place to start there is even integration with sound masking, because we've done that historically as well, where something that sound masking companies have done quite well is make it relatively simple to get arrays of speakers deployed at some scale. And so we've had that experience too, where a sound masking system could be used to deliver the soundscaping that we're then generating. But yeah, I really like that sort of phrase that your German friend used, workplace is the new hospitality. It reminds me of Tim Oldman of Leesman. So one of the greatest analysts globally who's looked at this problem. And people found, as you said, that going home, that the workspace, that the home office was good for productivity. The way that Tim and Leesman explained this, I think, is the best that I've seen, and I won't do it justice, but essentially they found that, and it's really quite striking when you think about it, that when people went home for COVID, any task that required some degree of focus to get done was better achieved at home, whether it was like the kitchen table or, in a shared flat. That environment, which was not designed for this task at all, did a much better job of supporting focused work than the office, right? And the office, in theory, should be designed to support focused work, yet clearly there is an issue there. And so, yes, there have been major issues as people have been coming back into the workplace, or as executives have wanted people to come back to the workspace. And we know that success with that really has varied globally, geographically, with the US West Coast really struggling to get people into offices these days. If you look at, it's a very different situation if you're looking at workers in a factory environment, right, who are back to work 5 days a week. Compare that to a senior software engineer. But yeah, there are some major costs to this. I was just on a panel recently with CEOs put on by University of California. And this is a major issue for CEOs who want people to come back together. As you say, this is it's critical for innovation. I've around a dozen patents, and I can tell you those were never created in a scheduled Zoom meeting to discuss at the particular patent, right? It was through informal conversations and collisions of functions that didn't normally collide. And that's well understood and documented in organizational behavioral literature, right? The extent to which creativity and innovation really is fed by weak ties and people who don't normally get together and haven't had a planned interaction, how that leads to innovation. It's also key for culture, right? The sense that I belong to this organization. It's much more challenging to do as a fully remote company. And particularly as you get big, a lot of companies really struggle with that, as well as on the job learning. We know a lot of people really have been struggling with on the job learning in remote environments. So yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big deal for CEOs and executives. And we've certainly seen this as well, where in workspace, a lot of companies are now working to create better workspaces than before. We work with a number of companies too who are doing that while reducing their overall spend on real estate. So companies that have larger real estate portfolios that are maybe shutting down the larger campus that was outside of the major city, moving to a smaller tower or collection of floors in the city. So reducing their overall real estate, but then creating better than ever workspaces to do exactly what you described, to give people a reason to come in.
Yeah, and there's been some fascinating kind of studies and anecdotal evidence of, for example, I was talking to a firm of architects and they were telling me that to do with what you talked about with culture, particularly companies that are changing significantly, expanding and onboarding people in a remote environment, and they never get to kind of experience that culture. But another element of it that I hadn't really thought about until it was pointed out to me is that for senior executives, remote working can be relatively easy. You know, for example, I have an office here that's quiet and comfortable. But for more junior workers, where, as you mentioned earlier, they may be sharing a flat with 4 or 5 other people and they're all trying to do Zoom calls at the same time in the living room, or, you know, I was on a lot of Zoom calls during COVID where you could see it was in the person's bedroom and the bed was, you know, behind it. There's more of a driver to come back because, you know, they don't have the spaces to make comfortable home offices. Plus, a lot of their social interaction is based around people they know from work, whereas when you're older, like we are, you've got kind of families and you've got relationships built up outside that environment. But when you're in your 20s, a lot of your social life is around people that you know from work. And all of that stuff I hadn't even thought about until someone brought it up. But this idea in the office, you know, we've long been in offices where you come in every day and you go to your desk and you sit down at your desk and you work, and maybe you go into some meetings and come back to your desk and then you go home at night. When I was working in offices more, I was really conscious even then that there are different environments that suit different types of work that I might do during the day. And seeing now this concept where people can move around the office and find spaces that suit the type of work that they happen to be doing then, rather than staying in the same space all day, seems just so much more intelligent and a better use of workspace, creating these different environments rather than this kind of worker bee environment kind of from Victorian times when we're all sat in rows kind of behind desks and all having exactly the same experience that we have all day. What's your experience in that environment?
Yeah, so you brought up activity-based working earlier, and that's a good term to describe what you were just talking about. And I think it's very important as a term to distinguish one open plan office from another. So, you know, the open plan office obviously has experienced a lot of backlash in the many decades that it's been in existence. And one could debate whether it's been successful in improving productivity or whether it was really more of a tool to cut down cost, right? To simplify the cost and reduce the cost of buildings. And because of executives' perceptions that it's nice to have everyone visible. So from what I've read, there's a great book by Chris Burdick called Clamor, which in particular looks at noise and sound. And he spends a good amount of time talking about the open office initially and sort of how that came about. And I'd say the consensus is probably that the open office, as distinct from private offices, pretty bad for people's productivity on the whole. Has certain advantages like speed of access to information compared to when you have to go into someone's office and things are filed and in files. Being able to just pop by someone's cubicle and ask them something, that was better. But then the costs in terms of noise in particular, distraction, and just being sort of an awful environment for people to go in for so many hours a day are pretty clear and well understood. Activity-based working then, instead of creating large open cube farms, uses a lot of the language of the open plan office. You don't have people behind cubicle walls. You have fewer private offices, but you have different space types that are more functionally programmed, as you were describing. So this area is maybe a quiet zone. It may or may not actually be quiet if you pull out a sound pressure level meter, but right, we know that a certain behavior there is acceptable. Coming in and doing some emails or writing, getting on a phone call is not. Other spaces might be more about collaboration, or we use pantries and cafes to sort of generate that type of atmosphere. Activity-based working, generally speaking, does much better in terms of productivity compared to the old open plan office. And a lot of what we're doing with Moodsonic and Soundscaping, you can sort of think of as a sonic analog to that, just as you wouldn't create just one layout in an office these days. You have, certain areas for focused work, other areas for collaboration, for different types of people, different types of activities. You ought to be doing the same thing with sound as well. And so zoning becomes very important when you think about soundscaping, making sure that you're creating zones for different types of work and for different types of people. As you were talking about some of the demographic differences in terms of how people experienced COVID, Leesman also backs that up. I mean, everything you were saying is backed up by research at this point. And yes, older and executive, more senior employees had a much better time working from home than people in shared apartments or, more junior who needed to benefit from on-the-job learning, needed to really see other people. There's more to it than age, though, of course, as well. So we do a lot with respect to the neurodiverse population. I think the term's better understood every year, but something like 20% of the population is now understood to be neurodiverse. This includes autism spectrum, but also people who with ADHD, Tourette's. There are a number of categorizations of neurodiverse, and then within each of those categories, right? I mean, autism spectrum, that's a very diverse population right there. But when you look at that roughly 1 out of 5 of the population that are categorized as neurodiverse, 70 to 80%, Kay Sargent and Tarquette did a study, they found 85% of that population is hypersensitive to sound. And they did the largest study that I've seen. So we've got demographic diversity, we have functional diversity, engineers versus, sales, certainly diversity in personality and sensitivity to sound. And then, I've reflected on this a lot just in terms of where I align on those various spectra, and it changes day to day. Did I sleep well last night? Have I had too much caffeine? All of this can really impact my own sensitivity to sound and all of ours. So clearly a one-size-fits-all approach, just as it would not work as a visual design tool, is not what you want in the sonic domain.
Yeah. we could spend the whole of the rest of the podcast talking about this because it's such a fascinating area. But I want to talk a little bit about, I mentioned earlier that we talked in COVID when Moodsonic was relatively young. And I want to dig into what's changed between the last time we were talking on this podcast and now, because I know that there have been some really exciting developments within Moodsonic.
Absolutely. Gosh, so much change since then. I mean, and a lot of what we were just discussing in terms of how people think about the workplace, how they think about sound, really changed profoundly. Whereas you might have had, Google being sort of the classic example, you might have had fancy tech companies really investing in highly functional and differentiated activity-based workspaces prior to COVID. Now there's been a huge leap forward globally, right? And in understanding that if we're going to have this workplace, we'd better address some of these issues that we might have ignored in the past, like noise. So that's been a big change. From a more selfish or really Moodsonic perspective, yeah, when we last spoke, we were in very early days. Since then, we went from incubating a technology to launching a company. We took what was sort of an early MVP, so early version of the product to market, started getting a lot of feedback and really learned about how we needed to develop our product to get product market fit, and did a lot of this. And we've been since then really growing the business. If I go back even further, maybe just to Plantronics days and then put early Moodsonic and where we are today. So back in Plantronics days, where we made the first attempt to create this type of soundscaping product, and I think some people in the industry may remember this, I think it was conceptually really very well done. With respect to go to market, wow, that company got a lot of things wrong. Mm-hmm. And also, we ended up getting out of this mega company. The product that we got out was sort of like the Lamborghini model. So really only for the flashiest of environments. It's enough to make it really clear to me and others that, okay, we're delighting users. This has a major impact. We see improvements in cognitive performance and well-being and on and on. There's willingness to pay, but really only at the top tier. Then, we launched Moodsonic to bring the price point down as well, to make it more accessible to different environments. So we did that. And we're now really moving forward to make this ever more scalable and to address a much bigger market than we've been able to do today. Love to talk about what we're working on together there as well, as this is where our collaboration comes together as well. Particularly, our focus in Moodsonic is really largely in the software domain. Mm-hmm. Our technology is about generating sound, mm-hmm. and we want to have lots of little agentic generating units that can independently generate sound, and then sound that's responsive to a sensor input, to a user input, to the building saying, oh, the lights are on now, or you have people on this floor you didn't before. Mm-hmm. That's our focus. But we're delivering this over audio systems, which in some cases are not optimally designed to do this at scale. And this is the next big step for us together with Bluesound Professional.
Sure. And I really want to get into that. But before we do, there's a couple of things that I wanted to highlight. One is the emergence of the well office movement, or the well workspace movement, which has become a much kind of bigger thing, and the role of sound within it. We probably discussed that enough, but it's becoming more formalized. But the other big change that I've seen in Moodsonic is the move from, or the expansion out of just the workspace into particularly the healthcare environment. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you're finding in that different built environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So we went to offices first, sort of as our early adopter. And also, when you think about it, as a sonic environment that's quite hostile, introducing nature sounds, for example, we talked about that as a concept, but when you get into the details of actually doing that in a workspace where you might have 50 or 100 or a few thousand people, as some of our projects do, doing that in a way that's sensitive enough to all of the diversity that we spoke about, that doesn't require someone to constantly like tweak dials to get it to work, it's a big challenge. So we went there first because it's a very thorny environment, and that's our niche. You mentioned the well building standard. So IWBI, the International Well Building Institute, has created a standard called the Well Building Standard. It's one of the leading global building standards. It's just been growing really rapidly. This accelerated through COVID. So yeah, we do a lot of projects where they're specifically pursuing a well building certification, or they're majorly influenced by it. So it's a really important standard helping to define how buildings are built. They have various concepts, as they call them in the standard. One of them is the sound concept, but they also look at air, temperature, access to daylight, and things like this. And the standard as a whole has as its goal, if I represent it honestly or well, making sure that buildings are built with the occupants' health and well-being in mind. It also aligns very nicely with standards like LEED and BREEAM that are about energy efficiency and sustainable design. In fact, there's some more explicit linkages now between WELL and LEED. And WELL buildings are, they award credits for environmental sustainability. So these are all aligned, but they've been additionally looking at the impact of the building on the people inside that building. So it's really been growing. It's a really interesting standard. It does speak about sound and aligns very nicely with Moodsonic. It's been a key driver for us and for a number of our clients too. Moodsonic provides them with some nice pathways to get credits, right? Whether it's introducing background levels of sound to address the noisy, silent space we were talking about, or bringing in nature. We've done projects too that are have a particular geographic focus, whether it's in Australia or Japan or California, where we bring in sound from that region. And in doing so, it does a bit of storytelling. People feel that the building's really rooted in local geography, and they get some credits towards the WELL certification as well. So yeah, that's been a big one. We went first to offices then with this. We've been doing more work, as you say, in healthcare, also in some other environments like education, so schools, universities. We've done work in the nonprofit domain. We've been doing some work with like community health centers. So yeah, there's a lot to be done with soundscaping. Healthcare is our major expansion right now, and it's a big expansion opportunity for us. We've been doing some long-term research, in particular with one of the leaders in cancer care in the United States. We've done over a year of collecting data from 1,000+ patients, the full suite of physiological data, everything that you can measure in a patient coming through a recovery room. And there it's been really cool to see. So we see improvements in the patient experience. So with respect to their sleep, recovery time, perceptions of pain, and beyond. Also the staff experience in hospitals. That's not just a US phenomenon. Globally, healthcare staff still, since COVID, are really overworked, overstressed. And the environment that they go into, if you think about it from a sound perspective for a moment, think of what the hospital sounded like last time you went in, maybe from the waiting room through the corridors to the patient room. It's taxing on everyone, whether it's the patient, the visitors, or the hospital staff. And so we're seeing big benefit there for all of those parties as well.
You brought up something there that I think is important to emphasize, which is the value of research, that Moodsonic throughout its history has really been rooted in research and real world data, not just kind of vague ideas that making a better sound will do some nebulous good. And I've been following your work right from the beginning. As I say, we talked years and years ago now. And at Infocom this year, we're speaking now just after Infocom, we were delighted to be able to announce a partnership between Bluesound Professional and Moodsonic, something you and I have been working on for a long time now, but is now a concrete thing, where we become a supplier of specific hardware to enable all of this to happen. And you kind of led into that, and I didn't want to get into it quite yet because I wanted to bring in the healthcare thing, but now is a good time to do it. So, we have a whole plan that we're working on together as to how we, within Bluesound Professional, can produce hardware that really enables you to scale and to address a greater variety of applications. Um, Talk about it from your perspective, this partnership.
So maybe contextualizing it in that dropping cost curve that I talked about at the beginning, this is a really important one for us. So we've been growing our business quite rapidly over the past few years, and since we last spoke, we've really been getting a lot of traction. We have large companies that have standardized on us, that roll them out. And you're right, we do a lot of research, a short maybe summary of what that research shows, and we can get into it more if you'd like. But generally, we do a lot of types of research. We work with academic institutions where you're really trying to isolate specific variables, but creating a not really very real world environment to do so. And then most of the research that we're doing is, as a product development organization, we're doing user research, which I find much more real world and more valuable to us at the end of the day, where we do physiological measurements, we do lots of surveys, we do user focus groups and things like that. And given all of this, we know at this point this has a major positive impact on people, organizationally too, that flows through up to the top. And is something that companies are really gravitating towards and responding to. So we have a growing business opportunity. There are a few things, though, also that we uncovered that we need, particularly from a hardware perspective, as we do a lot of projects where we're doing traditional 70 volt or 100 volt audio distribution systems, where Moodsonic is sending audio into that system as a source. Where sensors are then picking up on the sound environment, and all of that's linking together. We'll continue to do a number of those, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But in particular, from a soundscaping perspective, if you think about all the zoning that I was talking about earlier, and you apply that to, say, a really large scale, a large building, we have a lot of zones, and where we really want each zone responding to what's happening there. It's not simple enough to send 8 or 10 sources into a DSP and then create a matrix. No, we need that zone on that floor to be responsive to what's happening there. Mm-hmm. So doing that with conventional audio systems can imply some pretty high cost points that limit what we can do from a soundscaping perspective. Whereas, as I was saying before, our goal is really to have lots of distributed soundscaping engines throughout the building, responsive to what's happening there. So that's one of the limits we've run up against at the large scale. Then when we look at the much smaller scale too, our system, which to date we have a head end unit that's generating some quantity of soundscaping into that audio distribution system, tends to push up the cost sort of at the most small scale. What we've been working on with Bluesound Professional too, it addresses both of those sort of extremes. So overall, we're going to see a real improvement in the cost of implementing soundscaping. Also, the simplicity of doing it, whereby it becomes much simpler, even for an architect, designer, someone without an AV skill set, but of course, as well as design and build firms, to say, all right, I need a zone here, a zone here, a zone there. Really, to drop that in becomes much simpler from a design perspective. Then, of course, part of what we're working on with Bluesound Professional too is, you guys being really expert in audio over IP and having great products that are globally distributed and supported. What we're really doing now is preparing a much bigger launch of this for the commercial AV channel as an opportunity.
Yeah, I think it really marries in well with what we do in general. So we make hardware that really is a supporting actor to music services in many cases, to control and monitoring systems. And what we found as we've grown is that we end up working with kind of best in class providers of in many cases of music. We're beginning to work a lot more with companies that are very interested in a more interactive environment where sensor input becomes much more important, all of which you've talked about. And the other thing that's really developed as we've grown is this variety of architectures. So what you've discussed as being the main architecture at the moment for Moodsonic is what I'd call a very centralized architecture, where you have players feeding into DSPs and a big matrix somewhere, feeding out to amplifiers and speakers. And that's certainly one way of doing things. And in some cases, it's the best way of doing things. But we're finding more and more being able to distribute intelligence more out towards the endpoint gives us a lot of advantages in terms of deployability, flexibility, the cost advantages, and then the advantages of being able to monitor towards the endpoint. So not just having monitoring at the beginning point, but all the way through the signal chain, in many cases, right down to intelligent speakers. And what we're looking to offer together is a variety of architectures. So a centralized architecture, a semi-centralized, what we call in our discussions a hub and spoke type architecture, right through to a completely decentralized architecture. And the decentralized architecture is really useful in another type of environment that we haven't really talked too much about, which is a very flexible environment where zoning may change. So I know that we've just done an installation together in Singapore where every single endpoint is intelligent endpoint. So that particular customer can change around their environment, rezone, make zones bigger, smaller, different, kind of at the drop of a hat. So without going into too many specific product details, the way I see it is that ability to offer choices that, as you mentioned, makes it more cost effective to a greater variety of customers. So going from the very large multinationals with huge offices down to a whole variety of different sized institutions. That's kind of how I see it from our side. What about you?
Yeah, I see it the same way, and we're very much aligned. And I think both sides were really excited about this product for those same reasons. Maybe just to add to that, sort of from a user experience perspective as well, that having our engine then decentralized in the way that you were describing, having it really sort of federated throughout a building, means we can provide a lot more in terms of personalization, where a user who wants to interact directly with our engine can do that where they are, whether that's in a large office and we happen to be in a particular focus room or mother's room or whatever it is, or in a residential environment or a retail environment. It creates the ability for much greater user interaction with the soundscape around them. It's a big step forward, really, in terms of making our products generally better, at a better price point, easier to integrate. Really is another key piece. It becomes much easier to deploy, and particularly in the early days, say at the smaller scale. Whereas, with a centralized system, that does imply a certain amount of cost and hardware and complexity. Whereas, really looking forward to the point together where it's as simple as a couple of smart speakers that get deployed that are where Moodsonic's natively operating in that environment. It just becomes so much simpler.
Yeah, and this concept also being able to monitor to the endpoint allows buildings to be, or users to be able to see the health of their system, not just at the beginning input stage, but right the way through. And this is something that we're finding users are a lot more. It's a conversation that comes up a lot more. How do we monitor and adjust the health of our system right the way through? Another area that you touched on that I also want to elaborate on a little bit more is the commercial element of distribution. So, we're hardware that's reliant on content, which most AV hardware is. The UCC space that our industry seems to be obsessively focused on, unified communications and collaboration, is really the only part of the AV ecosystem where we generate our own content. Every other part of the ecosystem, the content we're reliant on from often creatives, from musicians, video designers, but also in this case from generative algorithms. And we exist as hardware to reproduce that content. And that is very often music. But we've had a lot of people come to us and say, well, you have this hardware and music is one thing, but it's not the only thing you could reproduce. And we're very, very aware of that. And we're really excited to be able to move more mindfully and in a much, much broader way into a type of input signal that is not music defined, but is is soundscape, generative soundscape defined, and to be able to deploy that in a variety of different ways. When we talk to integrators, and particularly when we talk to consultants, this is something that really excites people because they know the limitations of what the option is now, sound masking. So they know that the current solution is, we'll call it maybe kindly, imperfect, but they don't know what the next step is, but they really want to know what the next step is. And that's what's super exciting to me, that we can partner with you that have led the way from the beginning, that are research backed, that have achieved traction with some really, really innovative installations and some really working with some really forward-thinking companies, both corporate clients, healthcare providers, even we've done work together with furniture companies that are thinking about this. So it's kind of super exciting to me to be able to provide a hardware platform that enables you to realize your dreams of different environments, and to be able to provide this commercial backbone that allows that solution to be deployed globally at whatever level, whether it's a big multinational that wants a global deployment, or even a small software company in Zurich or in Mumbai or somewhere like that.
Yeah, well, I share your excitement, Graham, absolutely. And not to say anything bad about music. You heard my story. I'm the child of musicians, and gosh, I'm very passionate about music. But I know also how music can be a big problem for me. People talk about Mozart being good for productivity. Play Mozart in anywhere near me, and I'll be stuck listening to Mozart now, and my productivity is like completely fallen off the charts, right? So absolutely, we need some better solutions, some solutions that can solve for the noise problem in the environments that we spend so much of our lives in now. We spend over 90% of our lives indoors now. When it was 90% pre-COVID. People spend much more time indoors now, and most of those environments really don't support us sonically most of the time. And so there's a huge opportunity there to do something about that. With my own personal experience, starting in Plantronics, like we went big, fast, and including trying to go to market in a big way, and trying to go to approach the commercial AV industry before that product was mature enough for that. So coming into Moodsonic, we did it slightly differently. Initially we focused a lot on our product, on the user experience, making sure that we had what was going to be good enough to take into the real world. Since then, we've established that, we're on the right track. We have some major benefits. We've got big clients. Now these clients are expanding with us. And the next step for us now, together with Bluesound Professional, is making it something then that commercial AV players, from integrators working on a smaller project like you just described, design and build, also consultants, making sure that we have a product that they can design in, that's easily understood, but that also attends to some of the things you mentioned, like monitoring, making sure that this is really ready for that level of scale. Really excited about releasing that together with you soon.
Excellent. So we're talking together in early July, and we're right in the middle of a process of really defining a suite of products that we'll introduce in a staged way over the coming months and years, to be able to provide as many different options as possible. So I'd encourage our watchers to watch this space. There will be announcements coming in the coming months, and it's such an exciting opportunity. Before we go, is there anything else that you'd like to say, Evan? Have we covered every area you want us to, or any last comments?
Let's see. I mean, my timer's telling me we've already gone over our hours, and I think we covered it all. I'd just say, if we didn't cover anything, and I'm sure others will have questions. We'd love to hear from people who are interested in this space, who have questions about it. Certainly want to make ourselves available to follow up on any of those questions.
Excellent. So that's a great segue into how do people find out more about Moodsonic and get in touch with you?
Simplest, of course, come to our website, moodsonic.com. You can learn more about us and what we offer today there. I'm also on LinkedIn, always happy to connect with someone in the industry, someone who's interested in this space. So any of those methods of getting in touch with us would be great.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming on again, Evan. It's always a delight to talk to you. Thank you for all of our watchers or listeners listening to this podcast. You can find it in your normal podcast platforms. A good way of doing that is on surroundscapes.bluesoundprofessional.com. We release new episodes every week, so please come back and see us. And thank you so much for your time. And thank you, Evan, for your time.
Thanks, Graham. It was fun. Appreciate it.